There is a moment in every avoidance journey that almost no one sees and even fewer understand. It doesn't come with a confession. It doesn't come with a sudden burst of affection. There's no dramatic shift, no clear signal, no reassuring words that tell you what's happening inside them. In fact, if you're waiting for something obvious, you will completely miss it. Because when an avoidant quietly decides that you might be the one, they don't move closer in the way you expect. They move differently. And to someone who doesn't understand this stage, it feels confusing, distant, even cold. But beneath that surface, something incredibly rare is taking place. They are not running anymore in the way they used to. They are not scanning for exits with the same urgency. Something inside them has paused, slowed down, and started looking at you in a way they've never done before. And the truth is, most people lose them right here, not because they did something wrong, but because they misunderstood what this stage actually looks like. What most people don't realize is that avoidants are always, on some level, prepared to leave, not because they don't care, but because leaving has always felt safer than staying. Even when things seem good, even when they're smiling, even when they're present, there's usually a quiet part of them keeping options open, keeping emotional distance just enough to protect themselves if things get too real. But when they begin to quietly decide that you matter more than anyone else, something shifts internally. They stop looking over your shoulder. They stop wondering who else might be out there. They stop entertaining the idea that there's always something better waiting around the corner. And here's the part that confuses people. They don't announce this. They don't say, "I've chosen you." They don't suddenly become expressive or emotionally open. Instead, this decision happens in silence deep inside them where words don't easily reach. And because you don't hear it, because you don't see a dramatic change, you assume nothing has changed at all, but everything has. This is the stage where their fear doesn't disappear, it transforms. And this is where people get it completely wrong. They think that if an avoidant has chosen them, the fear should go away, that things should suddenly feel easier, more stable, more predictable, but that's not how it works. The fear becomes quieter, yes, but it also becomes deeper. Before, their fear was about losing themselves, about being overwhelmed, about being trapped. But now there's something new layered on top of that, the fear of losing you. And that kind of fear is unfamiliar to them. It doesn't make them open up, it makes them more careful, more controlled, more aware of every move they make. They start thinking more, analyzing more, holding back, not because they don't feel, but because what they feel is starting to matter too much. And when something matters too much to an avoidant, their instinct isn't to rush toward it, it's to protect it by controlling how close they get. So from the outside, it might look like they're still distant, still guarded, still hard to read, but inside, the stakes have changed completely. And this is where something even more subtle begins to happen. They start observing you in a way that is almost invisible, not in a judgmental way, not in a critical way, but in a deeply attentive way that they would never admit. They watch how you react when things are uncertain. They notice how you handle silence, how you deal with distance, how you respond when they don't give you everything you might want. They pay attention to your consistency, your emotional steadiness, your ability to stay grounded, even when they are not fully present. And they don't ask questions about it. They don't sit you down and say, "I'm trying to understand if you're safe for me." Instead, they gather information quietly, piece by piece, through your behavior. And this is why so many people fail this stage without even realizing it, because they assume that if something is wrong, it should be talked about. But avoidants don't process things that way. They don't test you through conversations. They test you through experiences, through moments where you don't even realize you're being seen so clearly. At the same time, their emotional walls begin to change, but not in the way you expect. Most people think that when an avoidant starts to care deeply, those walls should come down completely, that they should suddenly become open, vulnerable, expressive. But that's not what happens here. Their walls don't disappear, they become intentional. Before, their distance was reactive. It was automatic, triggered by fear, by pressure, by anything that felt too intense. But now, their distance becomes something they manage consciously. They are no longer pulling away just because they feel overwhelmed. They are choosing how much to reveal, how much to hold back, how fast to move. And this can feel incredibly confusing if you don't understand it, because it doesn't look like progress, it looks like hesitation. It looks like mixed signals. It looks like someone who can't decide what they want. But in reality, it's the opposite. It's someone who has already felt something significant and is now trying not to ruin it by moving too quickly or exposing expecting too much too soon. And then comes one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire stage, the quiet tests. Not the obvious kind, not the kind where they push you away dramatically or create conflict just to see how you react. These tests are subtle, almost unnoticeable. They show up in small moments, in delayed responses, in slight emotional distance, in situations where they step back just enough to see what you do. And they're not doing this to manipulate you. They're doing this because they need to feel something that words can't give them. They need to feel that you are stable, that you are not going to chase them when they pull back, but also not disappear completely, that you can exist in that space without turning it into pressure, without making it heavy, without forcing them to move faster than they're ready to. And this is where everything can either deepen or fall apart. Because if you react with anxiety, with frustration, with the need for constant reassurance, it confirms their deepest fear. That closeness will cost them their sense of control. But if you remain steady, calm, grounded in yourself, something inside them starts to relax in a way they've never experienced before. And the hardest part about all of this is that while this entire transformation is happening inside them on the outside, it can still feel like nothing is certain. You might question where you stand. You might feel like you're getting just enough to stay, but not enough to feel secure. You might wonder if you're imagining things, if you're hoping for something that isn't really there. And that's exactly why this stage is so often misunderstood. Because it doesn't look like love in the way most people expect. It doesn't come with clarity. It doesn't come with reassurance. It doesn't come with emotional intensity that makes everything obvious. Instead, it comes with quiet shifts, with subtle changes, with moments that don't seem significant unless you know what you're looking at. And if you don't understand it, you might try to force clarity, to push for answers, to demand something more concrete. But the moment you do that, you risk interrupting something that was slowly, carefully, and silently growing beneath the surface. Because when an avoidant quietly decides that you might be the one, it's not the beginning of something loud and certain. It's the beginning of something fragile, something that requires space, patience, and a level of emotional steadiness that most people struggle to maintain. And the truth is, this stage isn't about getting them to prove their feelings to you. It's about whether you can recognize what's happening without needing it to look the way you expected. It's about whether you can stay grounded in yourself while they figure out how to move closer in a way that doesn't terrify them. And most people can't. Most people misread the silence as disinterest, the distance as detachment, the caution as a lack of care. And because of that, they react in ways that push the avoidant right back into the patterns they were just beginning to step out of. But if you can see it for what it is, if you can understand that this quiet, confusing, emotionally restrained phase is actually one of the most significant shifts an avoidant can experience, then everything starts to make more sense. You stop chasing clarity and start observing consistency. You stop reacting to distance and start understanding its purpose. You stop needing constant reassurance and start recognizing the subtle ways they are already choosing you, even if they haven't found the words to say it yet. And in that space, something rare has the chance to grow, not rushed, not forced, but real in a way that most people never get to experience simply because they didn't understand it when it mattered the most. And if you stay long enough in that space without trying to control it, something even more confusing begins to unfold. They start pulling away, but not in the way you've seen before. This isn't the sudden disappearance that leaves you questioning everything. It isn't the cold detachment that makes you feel like you never mattered. This distance feels different, but only if you're paying very close attention. It's softer, less reactive, almost like they are stepping back not to escape you, but to understand what they feel when you're not right in front of them. And this is where most people panic, because distance has always meant danger with an avoidant. It has always meant they're losing interest, shutting down, or preparing to leave. So your instinct is to close that gap as quickly as possible, to reach out more, to ask questions, to try to pull them back in before they drift too far. But what you don't see is that this specific kind of distance is not about leaving, it's about processing. For the first time, they are sitting with emotions they can't easily dismiss. They are trying to understand what your absence feels like, not just your presence. And if you interrupt that process by chasing them, by filling every silence, by not allowing them to feel that space fully, you unintentionally take away something they actually need in order to move closer. And while this is happening, their communication begins to change in a way that feels almost contradictory. You might notice that they are not saying more, but somehow what they do say feels heavier, more intentional. They may send fewer messages, speak less frequently, or avoid long emotional conversations. And if you're not aware of this stage, it can feel like they're pulling back emotionally, but the truth is they are becoming more deliberate. Every word they choose carries more weight because they are no longer operating on autopilot. They are thinking about what they say before they say it. They are filtering their emotions, not because they don't want to share, but because they don't yet feel safe enough to fully express everything that's building inside them. So instead of overwhelming you with emotion, they give you small pieces, controlled pieces. Moments that don't seem like much on the surface, but if you look closer, you realize they are revealing more than they ever have before, just in a quieter, more restrained way. And this is where overanalyzing becomes dangerous. Because if you measure their feelings by quantity, by how much they say, how often they reach out, you will completely miss the depth behind what they are actually trying to show you. At the same time, something even deeper begins to take shape, something they would never admit out loud. They start imagining a future that includes you, not in a dreamy, expressive way, not in a way where they sit you down and talk about long-term plans or shared goals. That's not how avoidants process connection. Instead, it happens in fragments, in quiet thoughts they don't share, in moments where they picture you being part of their routine, part of their life, part of something that extends beyond the present. They might think about what it would be like if you stayed, if you didn't leave, if things actually worked. And for them, this is huge because avoidants don't naturally think long term when it comes to relationships. Their focus has always been on maintaining control, maintaining independence, making sure they don't get too attached. But now, without even realizing it fully, they are letting you exist in a space they usually keep protected. And the reason you don't hear about it is because saying it out loud would make it real, and making it real makes it risky. So they keep it to themselves, protecting it until they feel certain enough to face what it actually means. And while they are quietly building this internal world, they are also watching something very specific about you. Not your words, not your promises, but your reactions, especially in moments of disconnection. They are paying attention to how you handle the times when they are not fully present, when they don't respond right away, when they seem distant or distracted, because to them, those moments reveal more about you than anything else. If you react with pressure, with emotional intensity, with a need to immediately fix the distance, it triggers something deep inside them. It reminds them of why closeness has always felt overwhelming, why they've needed to protect themselves in the first place. But if you respond differently, if you allow space without turning it into rejection, if you stay grounded without chasing or withdrawing completely, something shifts inside them. They start to feel something they're not used to feeling in relationships. Safety without suffocation. And that feeling is incredibly rare for an avoidant. It doesn't make them rush toward you. It doesn't suddenly make them open up completely, but it plants something powerful, a quiet trust that being close to you might not cost them their sense of self. And then, almost without you realizing it, small cracks begin to appear in their emotional armor, not in the form of deep confessions or long, vulnerable conversations, but in subtle, indirect ways that are easy to miss if you're only looking for obvious signs. It might be in the way they linger a little longer than usual, in the way they check in on you without a clear reason, in the way they remember small details you didn't think mattered. These moments don't feel dramatic. They don't feel like breakthroughs. But for an avoidant, they are significant because every small act of openness goes against a pattern they've spent years building. And the reason it feels so understated is because they are still protecting themselves while they do it. They are testing what it feels like to let you in just a little more, without exposing themselves completely. And if you're not careful, you might overlook these moments entirely, dismissing them because they don't match the kind of vulnerability you were expecting. But this is their version of it. Quiet, controlled, and incredibly meaningful once you understand what it actually represents. What makes this stage so fragile is that everything is happening beneath the surface, without clear communication to guide you. You are being asked, without even knowing it, to respond not to what is obvious, but to what is subtle, to what is implied rather than stated. And that requires a level of emotional awareness that most people aren't used to practicing, because it's easier to react to what is loud, what is clear, what is directly expressed. But here, the real connection is forming in the quiet spaces, in the pauses, in the moments where nothing seems to be happening, but everything is slowly shifting underneath. And this is where many people unknowingly break what was starting to build not because they didn't care enough, but because they cared in a way that didn't align with what the stage required. They try to define the relationship too soon. They push for clarity before the avoidant has processed their own emotions. They interpret the lack of verbal reassurance as a lack of feeling, and in response, they either chase harder or start pulling away themselves. And both reactions disrupt the balance that was allowing the avoidant to slowly move closer in their own way. Because the truth is, this stage is not about getting answers. It's not about forcing things into a clear direction. It's about allowing something to develop in a space that feels safe enough for both of you, even if it doesn't look perfect or complete yet. And that's incredibly difficult to do when you're used to measuring connection through certainty, through consistency, through visible progress. But if you can stay present without trying to control the outcome, if you can recognize that their distance is not always a step backward, that their silence is not always emptiness, that their restraint is not a lack of feeling, then you begin to see what most people never do. You begin to see that behind all of this confusion, there is someone slowly, carefully, and quietly moving toward you in the only way they know how. And that movement, as subtle as it is, carries more meaning than any grand gesture ever could. And if you remain steady through all of that, through the silence, the space, the subtle shifts, something begins to happen that changes the entire emotional landscape between you, even though it still won't be obvious at first. Their vulnerability starts to surface, but not in the way most people expect. There are no long emotional conversations where everything is laid out clearly. There are no dramatic confessions where they suddenly reveal everything they've been feeling. Instead, their vulnerability shows up in fragments and actions that don't announce themselves as meaningful unless you truly understand what you're looking at. It might be in the way they let you see a part of their routine they usually keep private, in the way they stay a little longer instead of leaving when things get emotionally close, in the way they soften in moments where they would normally shut down. And if you're only waiting for words, you'll miss it completely. Because for them, vulnerability isn't something they express easily through language, it's something they risk through behavior. Every small opening, every moment they don't retreat, every time they allow you to remain close without creating distance, that is them stepping into unfamiliar territory, and they are watching closely, not just how you respond to their openness, but whether it feels safe enough to do it again. At the same time, something even more profound is taking place internally. They begin to trust you, but they won't say it. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Because trust for an avoidant is not something they declare, it's something they build quietly, almost cautiously, as if saying it out loud might somehow break it. And this is where people often misunderstand them the most. They assume that if trust is there, it should be expressed, that it should come with reassurance, with clear signs, with words that make everything feel secure. But avoidants don't work that way. Their trust shows up in consistency, in subtle shifts in behavior, in the way they start to include you more without making a big deal out of it. More, they begin to relax in your presence, even if just slightly. They become less guarded in moments where they used to be closed off. And these changes are easy to overlook because they don't feel dramatic. But for them, they are significant because every step toward trust requires them to move against instincts that have protected them for years. And as that trust grows, something else begins to shift, something that might confuse you if you don't understand it. Their independence, the very thing that once kept you at a distance, starts to make room for you. Not by disappearing, not by turning into constant closeness, but by adjusting in subtle ways that show you are no longer on the outside of their world. They might start sharing parts of their life they used to keep separate. They might begin to include you in decisions, even small ones. They might open up their time in ways they didn't before, creating space where there wasn't any. But they won't announce it. They won't say, "I'm letting you in." They will just do it quietly, naturally, as if it's no big deal. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss how significant that actually is. Because for someone who has always valued their independence as a form of protection, making space for another person is not something they do lightly. It's not automatic. It's intentional, even if it doesn't seem that way on the surface. And then comes a shift that, if you notice it, changes everything about how you interpret their behavior. They stop running at the first sign of emotion. Not completely, not perfectly, but noticeably. Where they once would have pulled away the moment things felt too real, too close, too emotionally intense, now they hesitate before doing that. They stay a little longer. They sit with the discomfort instead of immediately escaping it. And this doesn't mean they suddenly become comfortable with vulnerability. It means they are starting to tolerate it. They are beginning to experience closeness without automatically associating it with danger. And this is one of the most fragile parts of the entire process. Because even though they are not running as quickly as before, the instinct is still there. The urge to protect themselves hasn't disappeared, it's just not as dominant. And this is where your response becomes incredibly important. Because if you react to their hesitation with pressure, if you try to push them further than they are ready to go, it can reignite that instinct instantly. But if you allow them to move at their own pace, if you don't turn their progress into expectation, something deeper begins to settle inside them. The realization that closeness doesn't have to mean losing control. And as all of this unfolds, their behavior starts to become more consistent, but still guarded. And this is where many people get confused again, because consistency is often seen as a sign that everything should now feel stable, clear, and secure. But with an avoidant, consistency doesn't mean complete openness. It doesn't mean all walls come down at once. It means you begin to see patterns that weren't there before. They show up more regularly. They engage in ways that feel less unpredictable. Their presence becomes something you can start to rely on, even if it's not perfect. But at the same time, there is still a part of them that holds back, a part that isn't fully ready to let go of all their defenses. And this can feel confusing, even frustrating, because it creates a mix of signals that don't always align. You see the effort, you feel the difference, but you also notice the distance that still exists. And if you interpret that distance as a lack of care, you might start reacting in ways that disrupt the very consistency that was beginning to form. Because the truth is, they are balancing something internally that you can't fully see. They are trying to stay connected without feeling overwhelmed. They are trying to open up without feeling exposed. They are trying to build something real without losing the sense of safety they've always relied on. And that balance is not easy. It requires them to move slowly, to adjust constantly, to figure things out in real time without fully understanding their own emotions yet. And this is why this stage demands a different kind of patience. Not the kind that waits for things to become perfect, but the kind that understands that progress doesn't always look clean or obvious. It's messy, it's subtle, it's filled with moments that feel like steps forward and moments that feel like pauses. But underneath all of that, something real is taking shape. If you can see beyond what is missing and start recognizing what is quietly being built, everything begins to shift in how you experience it. You stop focusing on what they haven't said yet, and you start noticing what they are showing you in ways they never have before. You stop expecting them to move at your pace, and you start understanding the courage it takes for them to move at all. And in that space, something rare continues to grow. Not loud, not obvious, but deeply real in a way that only reveals itself to those who are willing to understand it. And just when you think you've started to understand their rhythm, something inside them intensifies. This is the part almost no one prepares for. Because instead of things becoming easier, clearer, more emotionally stable, they become heavier. Not on the surface, but internally for them. This is where the real conflict begins. A quiet but powerful tension between two forces that have never been able to coexist peacefully inside them. One part is saying, "This matters, don't lose it," and the other part is saying, "This is dangerous, protect yourself." And the closer they feel to you, the louder both of those voices become. It's not confusion about you, it's conflict within themselves. And from the outside, it can look like inconsistency again, like hesitation, like they're unsure. But the truth is, they've never been more aware of what you mean to them. And that awareness is exactly what makes this stage so overwhelming. Because caring deeply requires them to step into emotional territory they've spent years avoiding. And they don't know how to fully exist there yet without feeling like they might lose control. And because of that internal pressure, something very quiet but very real starts to emerge. They begin to value your presence in a way they don't express. It's no longer just about enjoying your company or feeling comfortable around you. Your presence starts to feel grounding to them, stabilizing in a way they don't fully understand. They begin to notice the difference between when you're there and when you're not. The calm you bring, the way things feel more manageable, more steady. But here's what makes this so difficult to recognize. They won't tell you this, not directly, because putting it into words would mean admitting a level of emotional dependence that feels unfamiliar to them. So instead, it shows up in quieter ways, in how they linger, in how they return, and how no matter how much space they take, they still find their way back to you. And if you're only listening for verbal reassurance, you'll miss the depth of what's actually happening because their actions are starting to reveal something their words are not ready to hold yet. And then, beneath all of that, there's something even deeper forming, something they will fight to hide, even from themselves at times. They begin to fear losing you, not in a dramatic, obvious way, not in a way where they suddenly become expressive or clingy, but in a quiet, almost unspoken way that sits beneath everything they do. It shows up in hesitation, in moments where they almost say more but stop themselves, in the way they become more aware of your reactions, more sensitive to shifts in your energy, but instead of expressing that fear, they suppress it. Because acknowledging it would mean accepting how much you matter, and that level of emotional exposure feels risky. So they keep it contained, buried under their usual calm exterior. And this is where many people misread them again, because instead of seeing that fear as a sign of deeper attachment, they interpret the lack of expression as indifference. They assume that if someone truly cared, they would say it, show it clearly, make it undeniable. But with an avoidant, the deeper the feeling, the quieter it often becomes. And all of this builds toward a moment that defines everything that comes next, a breaking point, not always visible, not always dramatic, but incredibly significant. This is where they reach a threshold internally, where the tension between staying and protecting themselves can no longer exist in balance. Something has to give. And this is where one of two things happens. They either begin to lean fully into what they feel, allowing themselves to take a real step forward despite the fear, or they retreat into old patterns, creating distance, finding reasons to pull away, convincing themselves that it's safer not to go deeper. And this is the moment where so many connections fall apart. Not because the feelings weren't real, but because the fear became louder than the trust they were still learning to build. And if you don't understand this stage, you might take their withdrawal personally. You might think it means you weren't enough, that something was missing, that it was never real to begin with. But the truth is, this moment has very little to do with your worth, and everything to do with whether they are ready to face what they feel without running from it. And this is where everything you've done up until now matters more than you realize. Because if throughout this entire process, you've responded with pressure, with emotional urgency, with the need for constant clarity, it reinforces the part of them that believes closeness leads to overwhelm. But if you've shown steadiness, if you've allowed space without turning it into distance, if you've remained grounded in yourself instead of reacting to every shift, then something inside them has been slowly changing. You've shown them, not through words, but through experience, that connection doesn't have to mean losing themselves, and that realization becomes the only thing strong enough to counter the instinct to run. And this brings us to the part that most people get completely wrong. They see the distance, the silence, the hesitation, and they label it as disinterest. They assume that love should be obvious, that it should be loud, that it should come with constant reassurance and clarity. And when it doesn't look like that, they try to force it into that shape. They push for answers. They demand consistency too quickly. They react to fear with more intensity, not realizing that intensity is the very thing that makes an avoidant retreat. And in doing so, they unintentionally disrupt something that was growing in a much quieter, more fragile way. Because when an avoidant quietly decides that you might be the one, it doesn't look like a fairy tale. It looks like confusion. It looks like pauses. It looks like moments where nothing seems to be happening, even though everything is slowly shifting beneath the surface. And if you don't understand that, you'll try to fix what isn't broken. You'll chase clarity when what's needed is patience. You'll react to distance when what's needed is steadiness. And in the process, you might lose something that was never meant to be rushed. But if you can see it differently, if you can understand that this stage is not about proving their feelings, but about allowing them to feel safe enough to experience them fully, then everything changes. You stop needing constant confirmation and you start recognizing quiet consistency. You stop fearing the space and you start understanding what it's creating. You stop trying to control the outcome and you start allowing something real to unfold in its own time. And that's the difference between something that fades and something that has the chance to become deeply, genuinely lasting, not because it was forced into clarity too soon, but because it was understood when it mattered the most.